The room Kaelin left behind smelled of stale mead and oiled leather. It was the smell of half the cheap inn rooms in Skyrim, but this one had an undercurrent of something else, something metallic and sharp, like dried blood you could not quite scrub out of the floorboards. The footlocker at the base of the bed was the only thing of substance he had left. Valga Venetia, the publican at the dead man's drink, had given me the key with a look that was half pity, half relief. She said Kaelin paid for the room a month in advance before he disappeared, and the Jarl's steward said his effects were now part of the contract. My contract. I was the new Kaelin for Falkreath Hold. I knelt and lifted the heavy lid of the footlocker. It was not locked. That was the first strange thing. A man in this trade who did not lock his chest was either a fool or he had nothing worth stealing. Kaelin had been no fool. Inside it was disappointingly sparse. A spare tunic, a whetstone worn into a shallow curve, a bundled roll of what looked like old bounty posters, and a single leather-bound ledger. I picked up the ledger. The cover was plain, unmarked. I thumbed it open. It was exactly what I expected: names, dates, and payouts. Grelloch the Skinner, Cragwallow Slope, 500 septums. Frostmantle Tribe, Bleak Coast Cave, 1,200 septums. It was a clean professional record. Jarl Siggeir's steward had told me Kaelin was efficient. This ledger seemed to prove it. But as I flipped through the pages, I started noticing things that did not belong. Next to some entries in the margins were small, intricate drawings. Beside the entry for a bandit chief named Iron Hand, there was a tiny, perfectly rendered sketch of a dragonfly. Next to a coven of hags, a drawing of a pine cone. They were meaningless doodles, maybe, the product of a bored mind on a long stakeout. Still, it felt off. The precision of the drawings did not match the presumed mindlessness of the act. A man does not idly sketch with that much care. I closed the book and put it aside. The rest of the chest was just junk. A few mismatched socks, a bar of soap, a half-empty bottle of Cyrodiilic brandy. At the very bottom, however, I found one more thing. A small velvet pouch. It was heavy for its size. I loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into my palm. It was not gold. It was a collection of human teeth. They were clean, polished even. I stared at them, feeling a sour taste in my mouth. Maybe the metallic smell in the room was not my imagination. I swept them back into the pouch and tossed it back into the chest. I stood and walked to the window, looking out over the town's graveyard. It was bigger than the town itself. Falkreath was a place people came to die or to bury their dead. A fitting home for a man who collected teeth. The steward had been clear. Kaelin took care of all the Hold's bounty work for a decade. He vanished 2 months ago. The bandits were getting bold again, and Jarl Siggeir was getting annoyed. He did not like things that disturbed his wine and his comfort. My job was simple. Make the bandits unbold again. Step into Kaelin's boots. Looking at the contents of his footlocker, I was not so sure I wanted to. I had heard of the Dark Brotherhood and their strange rituals, but Kaelin was just supposed to be a bounty hunter, a professional. This felt like something else. This felt like a mess. The first official bounty was a piece of work so standard it could have been an illustration in a textbook titled, "How to Make a Living Killing People." The Jarl's housecarl, a grim-faced Nord named Helvard, who looked like he had been chiseled out of the same rock as the mountains, handed me the parchment. A small group of bandits had taken over the old Embershard mine, disrupting the iron shipments to Riverwood and Whiterun. The bounty was 300 septums for the leader's head. It was a pittance, but it was a start. It was a way to show the Jarl I was at least as competent as his last man. I did not bother with Kaelin's ledger. I did not need his strange maps or his insect drawings. I knew how to hunt bandits. I spent the afternoon at the smithy talking to the blacksmith, Laud. Not about Kaelin, but about the roads. A good smith knows the traffic. He knows which caravans are late, which guards are complaining about broken armor, which miners are buying extra pickaxes because theirs were stolen. He told me the Ember Shard crew were sloppy. A dozen of them, mostly young fools high on their own bravado, led by a disgraced legionnaire. They were hitting travelers on the main road a few miles east of Riverwood. That night, I did not go to the mine. I went to the woods overlooking the road. I found a good spot in the pines, high enough to see the road but deep enough in the shadows to be invisible. I settled in to wait. A hunter knows that you do not always need to chase your prey. Sometimes you just need to know their habits and wait for them to walk into your snare. The bandits were used to soft targets, merchants, pilgrims, farmers. They were not expecting a wolf to be waiting among the sheep. Around midnight, 2 of them came down the path from the mine. They were loud, laughing about some poor farmer they had robbed earlier. They carried their axes loosely, carelessly. I put an arrow through the first one's throat before he even saw me. He made a wet, gurgling sound and fell. The second one spun around, his eyes wide with panic, shouting a name. He got halfway through the first syllable before my second arrow took him in the eye. He dropped like a sack of grain. 2 down. I stayed in the shadows listening. I waited a full hour. No one came from the mine. They had not heard, or they did not care. Good. I retrieved my arrows, cleaned them on the dead men's tunics, and slipped back into the forest. I did this for 2 more nights. I never approached the mine. I just bled them, 1 or 2 at a time whenever they got careless. I picked off their lookouts, their foraging parties, the ones who strayed too far from the fire for a piss. It was slow, patient work. It was my way. By the 4th day, I figured there could not be more than a handful left. Their nerve would be shot. They would be seeing ghosts in every shadow. Now was the time to go into the mine. I walked up the main path in broad daylight. No one challenged me. The main gate was open. The first cavern was empty, the fire a bed of dead coals. I found the first 2 bandits in the second chamber. They were arguing, pointing fingers at each other. They looked exhausted and terrified. They did not even have a proper lookout. I killed them both before they could draw their weapons. The leader was in the last chamber, the one the old maps called the Forge. He was the ex-legionnaire the smith had mentioned. He still wore parts of his old imperial armor tarnished and dented. He was not young and he was not a fool. He was waiting for me. He had a hostage, a miner from the look of him with a knife to his throat. "That's far enough," the legionnaire said, his voice steady. He was a professional. I could respect that. "Drop your weapon." I held my hands up, my sword still in its scabbard. "The bounty is on you, not him," I said. Let him go. I'm not here for him." "He's my insurance," the legionnaire shot back. "You bounty hunters are all the same. You want the easy kill, no witnesses, no complications." "I'm not other bounty hunters," I said, and it was true. I was not Kaelin. I was not some butcher. I was a professional. "What's your name, legionnaire?" He hesitated. "They call me Brand." "Brand," I said, testing the name. "You were with the 5th Legion, weren't you? Fought in the Great War?" I was guessing, but his armor had the old markings. His grip on the hostage tightened. "How did you know that?" "I know things," I said, taking a slow step forward. "I also know you're better than this. Robbing farmers, hiding in a damp mine with a pack of green boys. A man who held the line at the Imperial City deserves better." He flinched. The words hit him harder than an arrow would have. The hostage saw his chance. The man twisted, biting Brand's hand. Brand roared in pain and surprise, shoving the miner away. That was all the opening I needed. My sword was out of its sheath and in his heart before he could recover his balance. He looked down at the blade, then up at me, a look of surprise on his face. He tried to say something, but only blood came out. I collected the head, left the promised 300 septums for the surviving miner who was huddled in the corner, and walked out. When I got back to Falkreath, I went to the inn. I opened Kaelin's ledger and found the entry for the Embershard mine bounty from 3 years prior. Kaelin had collected 500 septums. Next to the entry was a small drawing of a moth and a note. The legionnaire keeps his stash in the forge's quenching barrel. I had left 300 septums in that mine. It seemed Kaelin's way was not just different, it was more profitable. The thought was more irritating than I cared to admit. I had done the job my way, clean and by the book, and I had left money on the table. The Jarl's steward paid my bounty without a word, but the look he gave me was one of appraisal. I had proven I could do the work. The next bounty was for a necromancer who had set up shop in a barrow near the border of elsewhere. The pay was better, 1,000 septums. This time I decided to consult Kaelin's ledger before I set out. I was not going to make the same mistake twice. I found the corresponding entry from a few years back. Kaelin had also hunted a necromancer in that same barrow. The pay had been the same. Next to the entry there was no drawing, just a single scrawled word. Don't. That was all. Don't. It was not advice. It felt like a warning. My first instinct was to ignore it, to dismiss it as more of Kaelin's madness. I was a professional. I did not get spooked by ghost stories or cryptic notes. But the Embershard business had left a sting. Kaelin knew things. His system, whatever it was, worked. I spent the rest of the day in the inn's common room drinking and thinking. I talked to Valga Venezia. I asked her about Kaelin casually. He was a strange one, she said, wiping down the counter with a dirty rag. Most bounty hunters, they're loud, they drink, they boast. Him? He was quiet. He'd sit in that corner for hours just watching, never said much. But people were afraid of him. Afraid? I asked. Why? Was he a bully? No, she said, her voice dropping. It was not like that. It was... People who crossed him had a way of disappearing. A merchant who tried to cheat him on a payment, his caravan was hit by bandits a week later. A guard who gave him trouble. That guard requested a transfer to Dawnstar the next day. He never raised his voice, never drew his sword in town. He did not have to. He just managed things. The word hung in the air. Managed. That was not a word you used for a bounty hunter. You used it for a steward or a guildmaster or a king. I went back to my room and studied the ledger again. I started looking at it not as a record of bounties, but as a record of transactions. The drawings, the notes, they were not random, they were a code. I took the old bounty posters from the chest and spread them out. I cross-referenced the names and locations with the ledger. A pattern started to emerge. The bounties Kaelin took were not always the most profitable. They were the most strategic. He was not just clearing out bandits, he was pruning them. He would eliminate one leader to allow another, more controllable one to rise. He would take out a coven of witches that was encroaching on the territory of a hagraven he had some other arrangement with. He was not a hunter. He was a gardener. And the garden was the entire criminal ecosystem of Falkreath Hold. The necromancer bounty felt different. Don't! It was the only time he had used a direct command. I decided to find out why. I spent 2 days in the Falkreath graveyard, talking to Runil, the priest of Arche. He was an old elf, a veteran of the war, and he knew more about the dead than anyone. I did not tell him about the bounty. I told him I was a historian researching old Nordic burial customs. He was eager to talk. He told me about the barrow, It was not just any old tomb, it was the tomb of a dragon priest, a powerful one. He said the locals avoided it. They said the air around it was wrong, that it made the trees grow twisted and the animals sick. He said a few years ago a group of mages from the College of Winterhold had come to study it. They were never seen again. A bounty hunter went there after them, Brunil said, his voice low. A man named Kaelin. He came back a week later, alone. He looked like he had seen a ghost. He told the Jarl the mages were gone, that the place was empty. He collected the bounty, but he never took another job in that part of the hold again. Now I understood. Don't was not a warning about the necromancer. It was a warning about the barrow itself. Kaelin had gone in there and found something that shook him so badly he walled off an entire section of his territory. And now the Jarl, in his ignorance, was sending me to the one place Kaelin had deemed too dangerous to touch. I went back to the Jarl's longhouse. I found Helvard. I told him I would not be taking the bounty. He raised an eyebrow. The pay is not to your liking? The risk is not to my liking, I said. That barrow is a gate to oblivion for all we know. Sending one man in there is not a solution. It is a sacrifice. If the Jarl wants that place cleansed, he needs to send a company of legionnaires, not a bounty hunter. Helvard studied me for a long moment. I expected him to argue, to threaten, to call me a coward. Instead, a slow smile spread across his face. Kaelin said the same thing, he said. Almost the exact same words. Jarl Siggeir was furious. He thought Kaelin was trying to extort him for more money. And what did you think? I asked. I think a wise man knows which saber cats to hunt and which ones to leave alone, he said. He took the bounty notice from my hand and tossed it into the fire. The bounty is withdrawn. There is a giant that has been troubling the farms near the lake. A much simpler problem, 500 septums. I took the new bounty. As I walked out of the longhouse, I felt a strange sense of victory. I had not just avoided a trap. I had passed a test. I had acted like Kaelin, and I was starting to understand why his methods, as strange as they were, had kept him alive for so long. The job was not just about fighting. It was about knowing which fights to pick. The giant was a simple matter, big, loud, and predictable. I found its camp, watched its routine for a day, and then killed it in its sleep with a well-placed arrow to the neck. It felt good to be back to basics, to a problem that could be solved with a sharp blade and a steady hand. But when I returned to Falkreath, the simplicity ended. A man was waiting for me in the common room of the inn. He was large, soft, and dressed in silks that were too fine for Falkreath. He sat in Kaelin's corner as if he owned it. When I walked in, he smiled a greasy, confident smile. You must be the new man, he said, his voice a low rumble. He gestured to the chair opposite him. Sit, we have business to discuss. I stayed standing. I don't know you. My name is Bolli, he said. I own most of the timber in this hold. Your predecessor and I had an arrangement. I assume you will be honoring it. I crossed my arms. Kaelin is gone. His arrangements are gone with him. Bolli's smile did not falter, but his eyes turned hard. Our arrangement was not with Kaelin, the man. It was with the man in his position. A position you now hold. He provided a service. He kept my logging camp safe. He dealt with pests, bandits, spriggans, troublesome forsworn. In return, I paid him a handsome retainer, and I provided him with information that made him very successful at his other ventures. He let that sink in. This was the other side of Kaelin's ledger, the private contracts, the protection rackets. Kaelin was not just managing criminals. He was working for the corrupt establishment as well. The pests have been getting worse since your predecessor's departure, Bolli continued. There's a nest of vampires in Himar's shame. It's too close to my main cutting site. My workers are spooked. I want them gone, quietly. No official bounties. No word to the Jarl, just make them disappear. Do this and the retainer is yours. And my information network. I thought about it. Kaelin's ledger was full of notes about vampire clans. Bloodlet throne pays on time. The Coven of the Pale Lady are unreliable. He treated them like clients or competitors. He was managing them. Bolli was offering me a key to that whole world. It was a test, just like Helvard's test, but from the other side of the law. How do I know I can trust you? I asked. Bolli laughed. You don't. And I don't know if I can trust you. That is why this is a trial run. Handle the vampires in Himar's shame. Then we can talk about trust and payment. He stood up, dropping a heavy pouch of gold on the table. A show of good faith for your expenses. He walked out, leaving me alone in the corner with a bag of gold and a problem. I opened Kaelin's ledger. I found the entry for Himar's shame. It was recent, only 6 months old. Kaelin had cleared it out for the Jarl, but next to the entry there was a drawing of a shattered wine bottle and a note. They always come back. The deal with the master is void. The deal with the master? What master? What deal? Kaelin had not just cleared out the cave. He had made a deal with whoever was in charge of the vampires in the region, and then, for some reason, the deal had gone bad. And Kaelin had been forced to act. And now they were back. And Bolli, ignorant of the bigger picture, was sending me in to poke the nest. I was walking into a trap Kaelin had set for himself. This was the mess he had left behind. Not the teeth, not the ledger. This web of favors and threats, of deals and betrayals. It was a machine of his own making, and it was still running, even after its creator was gone. And I was the new cog. I took Bolli's gold. I went to Himar's shame. But I did not go in swinging. I went in like Kaelin would have. I went in to talk. The tin stench of death and decay hit me 100 feet from the cave mouth. Himar's shame was a natural cavern that cut deep into the mountain, a place of shadows and dripping water. The vampires had made it their own. The entrance was littered with the bones of animals and, I noticed with a grimace, at least one unfortunate traveler. I did not sneak. I walked in openly holding a torch. I wanted them to know I was coming. I wanted them to know I was not prey. The first one I met was a low-level thrall, his eyes wide and feral. He hissed and lunged at me. I did not kill him. I broke his arm, a quick, clean snap, and threw him against the wall. I want to speak to your master, I said, my voice echoing in the cavern. Tell him Kaelin's replacement is here. The name worked like a charm. The thrall scurried off into the darkness, whimpering. I walked deeper into the cave, past cells where ragged-looking humans were kept as cattle, past blood-spattered altars to forgotten gods. Finally, I came to a large central chamber. A vampire was sitting on a throne of carved stone and human bones. He was ancient. His skin like old parchment stretched over a skull. He wore the robes of a nobleman from a bygone era. You are bold, the vampire lord said, his voice a dry whisper. Bolder than Kaelin was at the end. Kaelin is gone, I said. I am here now, and my employer is unhappy with your presence. The vampire smiled, showing long yellowed fangs. Employers. Kaelin had so many employers, the Jarl, the timber baron, even me for a time. He was a very busy man. He promised to keep the vigilance of Stendarr away from my operations. He promised to steer other hunters clear. In return, I would feed only on bandits and travelers. A neat arrangement, but he broke it. What happened? I asked. He got greedy, the vampire said. Or perhaps he grew a conscience. It is often hard to tell the difference. He discovered my plan to expand my herd, to turn the village of Helgen into a new feeding ground. He objected, violently. He and his men came. They killed many of my children. They drove me from my previous lair. He thought he had destroyed me, but I am not so easily destroyed. So that was it. Kaelin had not just been managing the vampires. He had been complicit in their activities until they crossed a line, and that line was not morality. It was business, a competing interest. Helgen was a strategic town. An attack there would bring the Legion, the Jarls, everyone. It would disrupt the entire system Kaelin had built. He had not acted to save people. He had acted to save his network. So you came here, I said, to be a thorn in Bolli's side. The Timber Baron is a fool, the vampire lord sneered. His men are weak and frightened. They are easy prey, and their disappearances put pressure on the Jarl. Pressure that leads men like you to my door. It was all a trap, you see. A trap for Kaelin. I wanted to lure him here and finish him myself. But you will do just as well. He rose from his throne, and the other vampires in the chamber rose with him. I was surrounded. You think you are the first bounty hunter to walk into my parlor? The vampire lord asked. I will drink you dry, and then I will take your interesting little ledger. Kaelin's notes will be very useful. He knew about the ledger. Of course he did. He and Kaelin had been business partners. He probably knew more about Kaelin's system than I did. Kaelin made a mistake, I said, slowly drawing my sword. It was coated in a poison I had bought from the Khajiit caravans, a special blend designed for the undead. He came here to fight you. I am not Kaelin. I threw a small glass orb to the ground. It shattered, releasing a cloud of thick white smoke. It was a concoction of my own design, a mix of powdered garlic, silver dust, and crushed fire salts. It would not kill them, but it would blind. It would. Them. Burn their sensitive eyes and skin and fill the air with the scent they despised. The vampires shrieked, clawing at their faces. I did not wait. I ran. I was not there to be a hero. I was not there to cleanse the cave. I was there to deliver a message. I had learned that from Kaelin's ledger. Sometimes the best way to manage a threat is not to destroy it, but to show it you are too much trouble to deal with. I made it out of the cave, the screams of the vampires echoing behind me. I did not look back. I went straight to Bolli's manor. He was in his study, counting his gold. It is done, I said. The vampires are gone. He looked up, surprised. So quickly? How? My methods are my own, I said, echoing Kaelin's presumed arrogance. But they will not be back. Now about our arrangement. We negotiated for an hour. I got my retainer, a fat pouch of gold delivered to the inn every week, and I got his promise of information. I was now on the payroll of the most powerful man in Falkreath. I was also now the enemy of a very old and very patient vampire lord. I had stepped deeper into Kaelin's world. I was cleaning up his messes, and in doing so, I was creating my own. That night I made my first entry in Kaelin's ledger. I did not write down the details of the vampire encounter. Instead, I found the page with the drawing of the shattered wine bottle. Next to it, I drew a small cloud of smoke. It was a reminder, a note to myself, a piece of the system. I was not just using Kaelin's book anymore. I was adding to it. I was becoming part of its language. The weeks that followed settled into a strange rhythm. I would take the official bounties from the Jarl's steward. A bandit camp here, a troublesome wolf pack there. They were simple, straightforward jobs that kept the Jarl happy and maintained my public cover as a common bounty hunter. But my real work happened in the shadows, guided by Bolli's information and cryptic clues in Kaelin's ledger. I was no longer just a hunter. I was a broker. I learned that the frost-mantled tribe of goblins Kaelin had a bounty on were actually his primary source for a rare alchemical fungus that grew in their cave. The bounty was a cover for a trade agreement. I went there not with a sword but with a shipment of stolen blackbriar mead and renewed the deal. I learned that the dragonfly drawn next to Ironhand the bandit's name was a reference to the dragonfly-shaped brooches worn by the spies of a rival timber baron from Whiterun. Ironhand was not just a bandit, he was a corporate saboteur. Kaelin had not killed him, he had put him on his own payroll. I found him and doubled his salary. I was untangling Kaelin's web and in its place weaving my own. It was a dangerous, exhilarating game. I was richer and more powerful than I had ever been. But I was also more isolated. I trusted no one. Every conversation was a negotiation. Every ally was a potential threat. I was sleeping with a sword by my bed and a dagger under my pillow. I was living Kaelin's life, and I still did not know what had happened to him. The official story was that he had taken a high-paying contract in Cyrodiil and left. But the people who knew him, the people who were part of his system, did not believe it. Kaelin would not just walk away from the machine he had built. He was too proud, too controlling. He would have sold it or dismantled it piece by piece. He would not have just abandoned it. My search for answers led me to a name that appeared only once in the ledger, at the very back, on a page that had been partially torn out. Agnar. There was no bounty, no payment, no drawing, just the name, and next to it a single dark brown smudge that looked like dried blood. I asked Bolli about Agnar. The timber baron's face went pale. "That is a name you should forget," he said. "Agnar is not a man you put a bounty on. He is a man you run from." Bolli told me Agnar was a Nord of the old way. He led a clan of fanatics who called themselves the Worm Eaters. They were cannibals rumored to have dealings with Namira, the Daedric Prince of Decay. They lived deep in the mountains in a place called the Gorge of Whispers. They were not bandits. They did not raid for gold or supplies. They raided for meat. Kaelin had a deal with them, Bolli said, his voice a strained whisper. He kept people away from their territory. He would alter maps, spread rumors about rock slides and impassable roads. In return, Agnar's clan, they disposed of bodies for him. Problematic bodies. People who could not just disappear, people who needed to be utterly gone. A picture was forming in my mind, a dark and ugly one. Kaelin, the ultimate manager, had outsourced his dirtiest work to a cannibal cult. It was efficient, it was horrifying, it was perfectly Kaelin. "What happened to the deal?" I asked. "Agnar's son got bold," Bolli said. "He led a raid on a mining camp too close to the main road. They took a dozen people. It was too public. It could not be covered up. The Jarl had to issue a bounty, a big one. Kaelin was forced to take it. To maintain his position, you understand, he had to be seen to be doing something. So he went after Agnar's son?" Bolli shook his head. "He went to see Agnar, to negotiate, to try and manage the situation. He took a tribute, a captive forsworn Briarheart, a peace offering. He went into the Gorge of Whispers 2 months ago. He never came out. So that was it, the end of the trail. Kaelin had built a system based on managing monsters, and in the end, one of them had finally eaten him. It was a fitting, if grim, end. The mystery was solved. I could let it go. I could take over his network, run it better, be more careful. I could learn from his mistakes. But it was not enough. I do not know why. Maybe it was a flicker of professional pride. Maybe I felt I owed it to the man whose life I had stolen. Or maybe I just needed to see it for myself. I needed to see the place where the great Kaelin, the master manipulator, had finally lost control. I prepared for the journey into the mountains like I was preparing for war. I bought the best armor Bolli's gold could buy, I sharpened my blades until they could split a hair. I filled my pouches with potions of healing and stamina. I even bought a scroll of teleportation from a traveling mage, a desperate last resort. The Gorge of Whispers was aptly named. The wind howled through the narrow canyon, carrying with it faint, indecipherable whispers that seemed to crawl up my spine. The rocks were stained with old dark blotches. The air was thick with the smell of rot and old meat. I found the remains of the mining camp. It was a slaughterhouse. The cannibals had not been neat. I followed a crude path deeper into the gorge. I found their settlement. It was a collection of ragged tents and crude lean-tos built around a great roaring bonfire. And hanging from racks around the fire were pieces. Human arms and legs, torsos, heads, all of them stripped of meat. My stomach churned. I saw Agnar. He was a mountain of a man, his body covered in ritual scars and crude tattoos. He was sitting by the fire, gnawing on a roasted haunch of something. I did not want to look too closely. I stayed hidden in the rocks, watching, my heart pounding in my chest. What was I doing here? This was suicide. Then I saw it. Lying on a pile of furs near Agnar, treated like a trophy, was Kaelin's ledger, and next to it his sword and his boots. They had picked him clean. Anger, hot and pure, burned through my fear. These were not monsters to be managed. They were not partners in some dark enterprise. They were just filth. And they had killed the man who, for all his faults, was the most brilliant, ruthless professional I had ever known. He had deserved a better end than this. I knew I could not fight them all. There were dozens of them, but I could not just leave. I had to do something. I had to take something back. I waited until the dead of night. Most of the cannibals were asleep, passed out from their grisly feast. A few sentries patrolled the camp, but they were lazy, confident in their isolation. I slipped past them, moving from shadow to shadow. My target was not Agnar. It was the ledger. I crept up to the central bonfire. The book was right there, within arm's reach. Agnar was snoring, a greasy smear of fat on his lips. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and snatched the ledger. I tucked it into my tunic. I looked at the sword, the boots. I could not carry them, but I could not leave them here. I drew my own blade. With the tip, I nudged one of the logs in the bonfire. A shower of sparks flew up, landing on the dry furs where Agnar slept. They smoldered for a second, then caught fire. Agnar woke with a roar, batting at the flames. The camp erupted into chaos. In the confusion, I slipped away. I did not run, I walked, calmly. I did not look back. I had what I came for. I had Kaelin's legacy, and I had left a fire burning in the heart of his killer's camp. It was a fitting tribute. It was what he would have done. When I got back to Falkreath, I was a different man. The last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. I finally understood Kaelin. He was not a hero, and he was not a monster. He was a man who had tried to build a wall against the chaos of Skyrim, using the only tools he had: fear, greed, and violence. He had tried to tame the wilderness, not by cutting it down, but by learning its rules and becoming its apex predator. And in the end, the wilderness had claimed him. I sat in my room at the dead man's drink. My room. I opened the ledger I had rescued from the fire. The cover was singed and the pages smelled of smoke and death. I turned to the last page, the one with Agnar's name and the bloodstain. I took out my knife and pricked my thumb. I added my own bloody thumbprint next to Kaelin's. A new contract. A new partnership. Then I turned to a fresh page. The Jarl had a new bounty. A group of Forsworn had been attacking the roads near Markarth. A simple, straightforward job. But I knew from a note Bolli had given me that this particular Forsworn clan had recently acquired a cache of dwarven metal. And I knew from a drawing in Kaelin's ledger of a strange gear that a certain blacksmith in Markarth paid a very high price for untraceable dwarven ingots. The job was not the bounty was just the excuse. The job was the system, the machine, Kaelin's machine. My machine. At the desk, I dipped the quill in the inkpot. Next to the name of the forsworn clan leader, I did not write a note. I drew a small, careful sketch of a single, perfect gear. Then I closed the book and waited for the ink to dry.